Welcome to Discography, the music podcast that delivers the objective truth about the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever existed.
I'm Joe Kennedy.
I'm Dave Gebro. Oh man, dude, I gotta tell you something. Doing all this work on, this era of time in music really made me think about some of the shows that I was seeing around that time. It was a fecund period in my in my music watching club dwelling
shows. Career. So what years are we talking about here?
This particular story came from, I believe, 91.
91, okay.
Okay, so this is not a huge fan, not a big detractor either. Henry Rollins at the time had, with the Rollins Band, that song Low Self-Opinion, Low S.O.
Right. Probably
my favorite song of his solo career. So I went to see him one night. Can't remember the exact venue in Boston, but suffice it to say it had to have been like Paradise or Avalon or something. Mm-hmm. Walk in, there's fucking Henry right there when I walk in. So without having any build-up, just because he's right there, a foot away from me, I just say, Henry, would you mind signing the back of my ticket? He cringes like I tried to set him on fire with an acetylene torch and goes, try to act human.
That's so at odds with his persona. He's kind of. He
made me feel so little.
He comes across as a big tough guy, but he's like cowers in fear.
He fucking bullied me. I paid to see him, and he bullied me, Joe.
Oh, Mr. Rollins.
Mr. Rollins, will you sign my ticket?
Have some humanity.
This guy was not nice, man.
Was he squeezing a cue ball?
He was like, the way I remember
That's how he used to warm up for shows. He would squeeze a cue ball.
Really?
Yeah.
He would?
Yeah. You can't really, he doesn't do anything when you squeeze it. So that's kind of like.
Does he have a sense of humor? It doesn't seem like, maybe he does.
Like he does now. Kind of did then. I don't know. Yeah, I guess he just doesn't like to sign ticket stubs.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it's not like I'm an autograph collector. I'm far from the king of comedy.
It's easier to just sign it than to go into
yeah, to go into an anti-me tirade.
Like it just takes a second.
Thanks a frigload, dude. Be your fan forever. Suffice it to say, that's where I checked out of his career. But if he were to be on the show, I could potentially reassess his discography.
Maybe he'll come on. Come on, Henry.
Yeah.
We know you're listening.
Come on, man. Come on.
Come, Dave.
Sign the back of my ticket.
He still has the stub. Come sign it.
All right, back to business. First things first, you guys need to know just how seriously we take this shit.
Discography is heavily researched, and the music is always reassessed with fresh ears.
We do not just cover albums. We do a searingly honest, deep dive analysis of all EPs, singles, comp tracks, relevant solo work, and bootlegs, plus other appearances on people's records.
All releases are slapped with an objectively accurate star rating from 0 to 5.
Which allows us all to come face to face with the true shape of an artist's overall arc.
Today on Discography, we are returning to the scene of the spray canning. Turning the spray cans. Back on the replacements, we are going back to our discussion with Bob Mehr.
Drunken punk shredding pages from the classic rock playbook turned singer-songwriter asshole swapping out his band for session man replacements.
Right, those guys, that thing. We're going to take you back now to the rest of our discussion with author,
replacements biographer, and author, and all-around great guy and raconteur, Bob Mehr.
Here is the rest of that discussion. So now we move on to, I guess they sign a major label deal.
Yeah, well, before we go to Tim, I just want to mention, without covering it in great detail, that in 1985, The Shit Hits the Fans comes out. Right. This is a twin-tone cassette-only live album, recorded live at the Bowery in Oklahoma City on November 11th, 1984. And released January 25, 1985.
You can listen on YouTube if you want to check it out. It's up there.
And it is great. Rolling Stone, which has ceased to matter post-1969 or so, included it on their list of the 50 greatest live albums of all time. Do with that nugget of information what you will. Then we certainly move on.
Right, so you want to talk about them signing with Sire, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, by the time they had released Let It Be, there was, building buzz, but no real clear pathway to a major label for a band like them. I mean, Jason and the Scorchers had been signed, I think at that point, the Del Lord, some, kind of bands. Axe to a certain extent, you could say, had been signed, even though they sort of went through Slash and then into the Warner Brothers kind of family. But when Let It Be came out, I think people started to really recognize not only is this a great band, but Paul is a kind of generational talent as a songwriter. Or even if they didn't recognize it that much, they knew there was something there, and that maybe this band was a harbinger of a kind of new kind of music. Alternative music basically hadn't been marketed on a major label level to that point. And through a series of circumstances, Michael Hill, who had actually been one of the first guys to book them in New York, where they did their first shows at Folk City, he ended up working for Warner Brothers. He was trying to sign them, but he was a young junior A&R man, wasn't making any progress. And then, again, as fate and fortune have a big hand in all through the Replacement story, Seymour Stein, the head of Sire Records, which was also part of Warner Brothers, sees them playing at Irving Plaza, very famously after they had played essentially a secret show at CBGB's. It was a label showcase for all these labels that were really interested, and many of whom had come because the band had made the cover of The Village Voice in that R.J. Smith story. And so, of course, they totally bombed that night, drove all the label people away. They play a few nights later at Irving Plaza where there's no label people, but Seymour Stein sees them and they get signed. And so Seymour signs them. Michael Hill is their A&R man. They go in to make their major label debut, Tim.
This is where I come in.
Sure.
And it's a weird entry point. It's
meaning this is where you first started to hear
as a fan,
as you were aware of them in real time.
Strange one, because this is where like a real schism sort of falls into place here. And definitely informs the music.
Well, for me, right off the bat, the sound of Tim is a little more of its time, where Let It Be is a more timeless kind of sound to it. It's a little bit on the slick side. Tommy Ardelli, a.k.a. Tommy Ramone, produced it.
I can't believe you even bothered trying to pronounce his last name.
It's probably wrong, but I'm just going to go for it. It's the production seems more dated on this one than it does on the two surrounding it. Like it seems like to me, Pleased to Meet Me and Let It Be kind of hold up more. This has a thin kind of sound.
It does have a thin sound. There's very little low end on it. It's like Husker Du's records at the time. They're just so thin.
I would disagree that it's more polished. In a funny way, it was. In some ways, I guess it depends. All these words mean different things to different people. But yes, it was not a great sounding record that I think they were expecting. And in fact, I think the band, because they had signed a major label, they were very conscious of not making something that sounded slick or overproduced. Right. And in the process kind of made something thin sounding, which may not have really been their fault. It might have been, Tommy Ramone's sort of doing, or, he wasn't working with his regular engineer.
Kind of like Iggy Pop raw power syndrome.
Yeah, it could have been something in the mix, and that's one of the things that we've often thought of addressing in terms of the archival stuff, is like maybe there's something that can be done with Tim, but
that would be incredible. That truly would be great.
But in a weird way, I can hear what you're saying in that it's
just to see what it would be like, because I'm used to it, and while it's got its flaws, it's certainly got its positives. Yeah. But if it had some balls,
right. I almost never like when a band goes and like remixes a record.
Yeah.
I almost always. Almost like 99 times out of 100 prefer the original.
Except for the case of Dead Man's
right,
Pop,
that is a notable exception.
But it's like that is the thing with a lot of the Replacement's major label records, this being the first, is they are products of their time in terms of production. That's partly because the 80s was it was the era of a producer, and it was a kind of producer's records were a producer's medium at that time.
Yeah, we ran into that on this show a lot.
and in a weird way, the Replacements, there were no, at that point, any alternative, star producers. There was no Butch Vig. Scott Litt didn't exist yet, really, as a superstar producer. So you were kind of dealing with veterans of classic rock bands. Sandy Pearlman, he produced like the Dream Syndicate and had produced the Clash and stuff. Or Tommy Ramone, he was kind of in the Sire family because obviously the Ramones were on Sire. So it's the Replacement sort of production over the next three records.
Wow, you brought up Sandy Pearlman without mentioning Blue Oyster Cult.
Blue Oyster Cult, yeah. But it's like it's funny that some people, depending on, how old you are, what era you grew up in, what your kind of listening, sort of what your audio context is, they hear different things. Some people think Pleased to Meet Me is this really dated sounding thing. Some people think, weirdly, Let It Be is a kind of real indie of its period, of its production.
Right.
And then some people think Tim is. So it's sort of, it's a little bit of a Rorschach test in terms of like the production for this middle period.
Let's focus on one particular thing about Tim, okay?
Sure.
When I think about this record, first of all, I think of the cover, which is very haunting and very chilling and uninviting too. And Bob's kicked out of the band toward the end of '86. He's also the only member of the band whose face is clearly visible on the cover, and it's upside down. So there's definitely some bizarre interpersonal band politics that are being played out for all the world to see.
Yeah, that was an artist interpretation. Robert Longo, who was a very famous, again, very 80s famous, New York artist. Somebody at Warner Brothers got him to do it, and he hung out with the band for a while. And that, in a kind of brilliant way, even though I don't know that like you say, it's not a very inviting or immediately appealing, especially after like the beauty of the Let It Be cover, and in a way the cheekiness of the Pleased to Meet Me cover. Tim is such a weird cover, but it does really capture what was going on in terms of the dynamics and the politics of the band. Bob being this weird looming force that is kind of blinding or crippling the others. So Longo really did have it right, although it doesn't really make you love the record cover.
No,
in a funny way.
But it's an accurate statement on what the contents are.
So this one has a lot of really amazing songs. Like the best stuff on this is really up there with their very finest.
Agreed.
A lot of great ones on this one. Their most streamed song, by the way, surprisingly, is "Swingin' Party."
Is it really?
It's their number one.
Yeah, I think that's because Lord did a cover of it, and that's why that's like sort of far away. But yeah, it's probably, I was actually saying this to somebody in another interview. I think. It's an album sort of compromised by the politics of the band at the time. Paul's writing was moving in a completely different direction than sort of Bob was going, and there was also interpersonal stuff with Bob that was happening. And almost as a sop to Bob, he put on a couple of songs that were really just showcases for Bob to kind of run wild and Lay It Down Clown and Dose of Thunder. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think he actually
those have always struck me as very weird because they feel like dog biscuits.
Yeah, and he had other songs, like I was saying, if you took those two songs off and you put Nowhere Is My Home in the original version of Can't Hardly Wait, this is by, I think, then it takes over, Let It Be, and it's their best album. Right. But, bands don't exist in a vacuum. There's sort of day-to-day realities.
Yeah, that would have been a great decision. Yeah, when I hear an outtake like Nowhere Is My Home, it's very sad to me because, it's obviously, as a fan, you can tell it's cut from the running order, so there could be more singer-songwriter stuff because those brilliant, scorching, wandering lead guitar lines, that it just immediately had to have disqualified the track.
And the other thing, though, too, is by this point, again, they were on the road probably the most they'd ever been in the lead up to recording this album. And again, there wasn't as much time, there wasn't as much kind of space for Paul to write. So a lot of these things that are on here are sort of ideas almost that he evolved in the studio. And Paul always did that to a certain extent. He wouldn't have 100% finished lyrics. He never really wrote stuff down. Something like Here Comes a Regular, sort of an exception that he kind of revised a little bit. But, things like Hold My Life or I'll Buy. I mean, there's no real lyrics on there. He just sort of made up stuff. Big chunks of them on the spot, and so I think those are great songs. But
Hold My Life has always been one of my favorite replacement songs.
So I think there's a lot of mood and attitude and feel on this record, rather than kind of the refined songs that maybe you had on the previous album on Let It Be, or that you would even have on the next one to a certain extent. So
how do you guys feel overall? What do you give it?
I give this 4 stars, and there's so many good songs on it. It is marred by like a few kind of throwaways, but this one has a lot of the ones that I really kind of connect with.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has the big songs. It's got Bastards of Young, Left of the Dial, Little Mascara.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that video. Let's talk about the inception of it. Let's talk about the fact that it was used how many fucking times?
At least 3. I don't know that much of them got airplay other than the original, which was for Bastards of Young. But yeah, I mean, basically Warner Brothers, this is the height of the video era. Warner Brothers wanted to get them on and do a video.
They're already on record, saying that they think videos are dumb. On
the
previous album.
Senior video. So So the sort of way to make a video was to not appear in it, and they don't. Although Paul and Tommy were sort of on the set, which was just the video director's apartment at that time, or producer's apartment at that time. But yeah, I mean, it was a sort of one of those videos that didn't actually achieve what it was supposed to do, which was get played on MTV a whole lot. But it's still one of the most iconic. Yeah. So it's kind of the ultimate anti-video.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but not only is it not completely, it's not reused. It's actually a different version for the.
Yeah, they just recut it slightly. One's in color, one's in black and white. One he's flipping through different records.
Right.
So they were trying to get value for money there, since probably nobody was going to air this stuff anyway.
The hook of Bastards of Young. It's another one where like they're the protagonist. We are the sons of no one, bastards of young. It's that's such a great hook.
Yeah.
Kiss Me on the Bus. I mean, you can't write a better song than that.
I love that.
It's an impossibly well written song. That's another one that felt really just so true to me. The sort of like being the shy guy who doesn't want to talk to the girl on the bus.
Yeah, and I guess because even though it has a couple of I wouldn't even say duff moments. I mean, Dose of Thunder is a kind of fun song in its own way. You just kind of know what could have been with this record, but I think because it has those really
I don't love Waitress in the Sky. I don't love I don't love Lay It Down Clown.
Right.
And,
Waitress is kind of fun, but overall, I think you have to say this is for me minimum 4, but I'd say really 4.5, just because it has the essential Westerberg songs, at least 4 or 5 of them.
I give it 3 3/4 stars. So I actually am in the least of you guys, but I'll tell you one thing: I will definitely support your remix of it, just as a curiosity factor, because. I don't think it's necessarily going to fix it. I think the problems with this album are inherent in the album, and I don't think they're huge problems. It's just when you're operating at such a high level, it's noticeable. So here's where little tiny Bobby Mehr comes into the picture, because Bastards of Young and Kiss Me on the Bus are shot out in grandiose style. On SNL on January 18th, 1986.
Now, if you watch that performance now, they actually sound pretty good.
Yeah,
it sounds like a good performance. I don't know.
It's not that he sounded bad. I mean, there was obviously things going on backstage. If you read my book, you kind of get a sense of the bigger picture of what was going on both at SNL and with the band and backstage. But yeah, I mean, now it doesn't seem. I mean, it certainly doesn't seem as crazy as like when Fear was on there on SNL a few years before. Although Lorne Michaels wasn't there at the time, but it's a great sounding thing. But in the context, if you saw anything else that was on TV, bands playing on TV at that time, it does feel like these guys are drunk.
They were on because the Pointer Sisters canceled.
Yeah, that's the story. Yeah. So it's definitely still holds up. And again, like a lot of things in the Replacements' career, it was seen as like a bad decision or a kind of flop at the time, but now it's become this iconic thing.
Right.
Well, at this point, what's their relationship with the suits at the record label? How are they like, they're about to, so they've made Tim. Obviously, all the stuff's happening with Bob. They're kind of at a bit of a crossroads. I mean, it's a success critically, but not hugely commercially.
They were still essentially, not really being hassled by the suits. I mean, they were in the Warner Brothers system, but Michael Hill, was basically their peer. Seymour Stein was as crazy, if not crazier, than they were. So it wasn't like they were getting hassled by real corporate higher ups.
Warner Brothers, one of the more artist-friendly labels.
Yeah, but also, the Replacements were still. This was kind of a trial balloon, in terms of a major label marketing and a quote unquote alternative band. The idea of alternative marketing really was kind of pioneered by some of the people at Warner Brothers who were working with the Replacements. So the Replacements are kind of guinea pigs, pioneers, and like they say, pioneers get the arrows too. So from the record company side, that was going on as well. But generally, there was a lot of hope and excitement and anticipation, because a lot of, now that they were on a major label, they were getting written about in big magazines. They were in the first Rolling Stone Hot issue in '86. The Hot Band. They were, L.A. Times, which was big for Warner Brothers because it was in their backyard in Burbank. Robert Hilburn was a huge fan, so they had a lot of big. They were becoming a critics band on a much larger level, and so the label was kind of taking its cues from that and saying, okay, well, they didn't sell 1 million records on this, but there's obviously something here that we need to nurture and develop. And Warner Brothers was still in the business of doing that with its bands, even as late as '85.
And then the carrot is being dangled, albeit it still is very hazy and out on some distant horizon, but it's being dangled. And Paul looks around, and sees this wild, unhinged guy who's drinking all the time, who seems to be stealing some of the spotlight with his hot licks. And in summer of '86, the very last recording session occurs with the Replacements as the band as we knew it up to this point. This is in August of '86. So Bob shows up for a recording session. They do 7 songs: Bundle Up, Birthday Gal, IOU, Red Red Wine, Photo, Time Is Killing Us, and Valentine. And after that, that was it for Bob. Phase 3, Paul Westerberg featuring the Replacements, 1987 to 1990. So before we actually move into the thing, what happened during that session, Bob?
Well, Bob, his relationship with the band was fraying. His own mental health was sort of getting worse. He had just gotten married, so he was kind of separating himself. I think he also just had that thing of he wasn't quite comfortable with the road and sort of being away from home. He preferred to be a kind of big fish in a small pond in Minneapolis.
Those
and
tours have a reputation of being very wild, but their behavior was like extremely, a lot of shenanigans on those tours.
Yeah, I mean, Bob had bigger issues than the band, but I think those things from his childhood were starting to catch up with them.
Right.
And also, I just think the band was going in a direction that, wasn't, great for him or anything he really necessarily wanted to be a part of. It had been this fun, great thing for 5-6 years, at that point, 7 years almost. And it was ceasing to be fun, and there were other things going on, I think, in his life that sort of took priority.
The spotlight the spotlight's hard for some people, especially someone like Bob, who suffered like straight up abuse. He was really abused as a child.
And I think the weight of the band shifted more to Tommy because, he was young, he was kind of had this energy, and Paul obviously was going to always carry a certain amount of weight. And Bob, to a certain extent got marginalized and marginalized himself to a certain extent as well. So it was kind of the only way the band really could have carried on at that point was, to part ways with Bob. And so it was kind of as difficult as it was.
Was it just understood? Was it implied? Was it the failure of young men to communicate adequately?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly was that going on, but I mean, he basically was abdicating his responsibilities and wasn't able to maintain, as much as the others were abusing drugs and alcohol, they were still doing the gig, and Bob wasn't doing the gig as much. I mean, he didn't show up for the sort of second day of the session, the demo session for what became Pleased to Meet Me, and that was kind of the final straw. But it had been a year in the making, a year coming, and in a way, Bob was relieved and ended up having some good years in the immediate aftermath of the Replacements. But it was a tough decision. You splitting with Bob, who's really the founder of the band, or certainly the co-founder of the band, and Tommy's having to make the choice to whether to keep him or kick him out. But it really was a choice of, do we keep Bob and just break up and we're not a band anymore, or do we fire Bob and just try and keep going? And I think everybody's sense at that point was there was enough momentum and value in keeping going.
So they sort of galvanized themselves, and they come out with a sort of even more ferocious kind of energy as a 3-piece. Some of the performances on Pleased to Meet Me are like pretty impressively scorching. They sound great as a band on this record.
Yeah, band dynamics. I mean, in a way, they tracked Tim as a 3-piece, and then Bob came in later and did his solos. But they were always kind of 3 guys waiting around for the 4th. When they knew Bob was out of the band, the sort of dynamics, the calculus of the group shifted.
Yeah,
you could, before you even get to the record, the demos for the record in fall of '86. You can tell if you listen to it back to back with that final session with Bob that they're far less tentative. Boom! Yeah. It's just there's a seriousness of intent and an efficacy that just didn't seem to be there just previous.
Yeah, I mean, I think they were trying to make a go of it. I think the other guys were trying to sort of, it's like demos. You're always it's the inception, so there's a kind of freedom there where you're not, there's no red light, there's no producer. That's the first time probably they were really working without a producer or somebody watching over them, because by that point they had parted ways with Jesperson as well. And so I think they felt even in the demo session, all right, let's kick it up a notch. And then when things didn't work out with Bob, they still carried that energy and that new sort of power trio dynamic into the making of the record, which they did with Jim Dickinson down in Memphis. And Jim obviously plays a pretty central role in how that record unfolded.
It does, in a very, very real way. It kills me to admit that there's a sharper focus without Bob, because being ejected from the band ultimately seems to have become Bob's fast-track excuse to kill himself. And he wound up doing it he wound up dying February 18th, 1995 at the age of 35 of organ failure caused by years of substance abuse and neglect. He had a son with his wife in 1989 who was profoundly disabled. His wife filed for divorce around 92. The son died in 2010 at the age of 21. So it was definitely a difficult life, fraught with tragedy, fraught with difficulty. And I think even though this may have been inevitable, it's very sad that it had to happen. It was his band. So it's a rough transition, but that's how it be. It's a tough world, that rock and roll.
Well, going back to where we were in '87, though, so they're making this in '87, right? It comes out later that year. So the sound of this one, they did it at Ardent Studios, which is where the Big Star records were made. Jim Dickinson producing. Obviously it doesn't sound like Sister Lovers or something, but I do love the way this record sounds, despite the fact that it does have a lot of like digital reverb on it. It's very reverby sounding. Usually not my favorite thing, but there's just something about there's a propulsiveness to this record. It's really like slamming. It really sounds like there's a lot of energy.
Jim's idea was to make it sound like a giant boombox blaring, and it kind of does sound like that.
It does, that's great.
They were recording on very early Mitsubishi 32-track digital machine, right. But they kind of, Jim, even though he had two great engineers in John Hampton and Joe Hardy, Jim was a kind of a primitivist, but he was not afraid of technology. And so it's an interesting record in terms of, like, as he put it, he was trying to get a high fidelity production of a low fidelity band, or vice versa, right. Kind of thing. And so, so it has a kind of peculiar, unique, sound for many myriad weird technical reasons. Right. But it's
so slick. It is really slick, and it's meant as a commercial artifact, and it peaked at 131.
Some of it, I think, is also Chris Mars's playing. He's gotten so good by this point. He's just like a machine. He kind of reminds me a little bit of like some of the drums almost sound like they're on like a Pro Tools grid or something. He's so good.
Well, there's that, and also they put an emphasis on his drumming. It was the first time they recorded outside of Minneapolis. First time really recorded outside of the kind of home team sort of thing. And
a lot of prominent drum fills and things like that.
And those guys were, being Southerners, they were very sort of conscious of the rhythm, and they even employed a bunch of tricks to kind of focus him on his kick drum and all that kind of stuff. So it was an album built, and again, an album is kind of a zero-sum game. If there's only three people on the album, everybody has more weight.
Right. There's more space. Important. There's more space. Yeah.
And there's more space. So it is truly the unique album in their catalog, in that it's the only sort of three-piece record.
I think ultimately it's a better album than Tim. It's more confident and assured. They pulled together in a really, really palpable way. The only thing that it can be faulted for, from where I stand, is that some of the material comparatively is half rate. Not the first part of the record, but to me, that stretch, Shooting Dirty Pool, Red Red Wine, and Skyway, I'm not a fan. I think it
really.
Skyway is one of the classic Lonely Guy songs.
I never got it. I never understood.
That's a song about a missed connection. It's a song about not connecting with somebody.
With it.
It's interesting though. Yeah, I think you're right. It's part of it because of Dickinson, part of it because they worked at Ardent, part of it because I think there was a sense of, they fired Bob from the band, so they needed to come out really roaring, and maybe even in their own sort of roundabout, half-ass way, they were focused more. And also, like I say, Dickinson kind of enabled them to do certain things that they maybe couldn't have under different circumstances.
Right.
And then he took over where they wouldn't finish something. Dickinson would kind of finish it in production, or in a sort of production way. So I think it is
kind of similar to Sister Lovers was done. Had the same kind of role.
Yeah. It's definitely there's a kind of completeness and consistency to the album, whether that's the production or the performances or just the overall, that I don't think exists on any of their other records in a funny way. And I think, and there's an accessibility, I think, to this record.
Definitely very, very accessible. I want to point out that, one of their best songs is an outtake, and it's Birthday Gal. I think it's their absolute best outtake. I always thought it was. I can't believe that wasn't put on this record. That
Well, there was always talk of maybe doing a double album, and they recorded tons of stuff. And Paul actually wrote a fair amount for this because there was a long layoff because he had broke his hand on the previous tour, and they canceled some dates. And so, in the 2020 box set that we did on this record, there's just tons of stuff. And so yeah. So again, like I say,
also Learn How to Fail. That should have been on the
Learn
record
How to
as well.
Fail. Run for the Country.
For the
He had
Country.
He had a lot of good songs, and
incredible.
yeah, it would have been an interesting. But I think Dickinson was wanting to deliver something to the record company, particularly after Tim, which was everybody was a little maybe disappointed in the sound or the power of that album, that it didn't quite capture the band. Like if you listen to the 2017 live release we did live at Maxwell's, which is from the
Which
Tim
is
era.
amazing.
Yeah,
And
you hear those.
By the way, I grew up in Livingston, New Jersey. I've been to Maxwell's a million times.
Right,
That
right.
was recorded on my birthday when I was 14 years old.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So like you can hear like what the band really sounded like around Tim on that live thing. And so I think Dickinson was really more about giving them the big replacements as they were.
Right.
And again, but it's not the big replacements because it's a 3-piece. So he was having to kind of fill in the gaps and the spaces. That's why you get the strings and the horns and outside players for the first
Right,
time
right.
on a replacements record, or real pro outside players. They've done some stuff with local people.
I want to throw out a giant chunk of steak, and and you guys please just have at it. So here's where the tension begins between being sort of young, rowdy ne'er-do-wells and growing up and going professional, whatever the fuck that means. I think that actually becomes the issue. No one actually knew what that meant.
I think this is kind of the last time they had that kind of manic young person energy. The next couple of records are kind of in a more mature sort of direction.
Yeah. And I don't know is the big reflective, the thing of the whole dilemma.
Right.
Yeah, but it's funny, like people see this record, and certainly to a greater extent, Don't Tell a Soul, as like, oh, the replacements are getting more professional. They're settling down. They're going for commercial success. But the reality was that probably the most chaotic the band ever was Please to Meet Me, Don't Tell a Soul, and into All Shook Down. So it's sort of funny what's going on in the records isn't necessarily reflective of how crazy things were, in their lives.
Well, before we move on, let's talk.
We haven't talked too much
bit-
about songs. Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about the music, because the music it's an embarrassment of riches, a smorgasbord of musical delights.
Great opening line again from the album. Get me out of this stinking fresh air.
right.
Great album opener.
At IOU, that was a song that he purloined the idea from Iggy Pop. I guess Paul had been hanging out after an Iggy Pop show on his bus, and somebody stuck a piece of paper in Iggy's face to autograph, and Iggy Pop wrote "I owe you nothing." Iggy Pop. And then obviously the tribute to Alex Chilton, who they were sort of associated with and hanging out with, and Ardent. That was a big reason why they came to Ardent, was because of Alex and Big Star.
Right.
And then you got things like Valentine and
Valentine's amazing. And by
Yeah.
the way, another unsung classic, Nevermind.
Oh, yeah.
Never mind. And the
That's
Ledge.
That's like almost ecstatically
That has some
gorgeous.
serious swagger.
Yeah.
And then there's things like Can't Hardly Wait, which is a song they've been basically trying to record since 1984, and
that's just a friggin' classic.
and they
I'm
finally.
glad they waited. The original version's great, but I am glad they waited.
Well, and that was the thing with Paul he knew this was a good song. That's why he kind of they recorded it for for Tim. They recorded it for this. They had tried it with the Alex Chilton even before they made Tim. So Paul would very rarely recorded songs multiple times. He was more likely to toss a song, the way he did with Nowhere Is My Home or something, and move on from it because he just didn't have patience and he was always writing. But with this one, obviously there was something that kind of stuck in his craw about it. And Dickinson really found the approach, I think, that worked and made it. So.
I Don't Know is another one it's such a great, they're the hero of the story.
You know what that reminds me of?
Should we buy some beer? I don't know. Can I borrow your hairspray?
It reminds me of Creek Alley by the Mamas and Papas. This is their replacement song.
Yeah. They're just these sort of tragic comic sort of characters,
This record I give 4 1/4 stars.
This one, to me, it's maybe not their best album, but I think it is my favorite, and I give it 5 stars.
Nice. How about you, Bob?
I think I'm going to go 4.5.
Nice. We tend to be in a 3/4 star range.
Oh, okay. So,
Yeah.
Can you do? Can I do 4 3/4? I think it would be 4 3/4.
You totally can. This is by the way, there's going to be a shower of confetti coming out of your ceiling miraculously, because this is the first time a guest has ever done.
You're now the second person in the world who's embraced the quarter star.
A lot of these ratings, and kind of my mind has changed as I've gotten deeper into work. Your relationship to records change over time, and I always would have thought Tim was a 5-star, but I think a couple of songs. So I think I said 4.5 on that, and the first album 5. It might just because I've worked on some of these more recently than I. Please
your
to meet me.
Relationship changes on it, yeah. Especially
so anyway.
you. I mean, God knows, poor guy, how many times you've listened to this stuff. But I like to think that along the way, you still have these like unexpectedly transcendent experiences listening to it.
Yeah, no, I mean you hear different things, and particularly with like the alternate versions or different songs. It's like you hear. Knowing these other songs exist, you sort of hear the songs you know in a different way too. It just becomes all part of this one big, oeuvre or catalog of stuff, body of work. So it's really kind of gratifying, and that's kind of what we've tried to do for the fans as well, to make this stuff available so that they can kind of have that new and different appreciation of these records that are so ingrained.
Well, I will lap up every last scrap you throw at my feet. I will disgrace myself in doing so. All right, let's get from 1987 to 1989. So we go into the Ledge EP, non-album songs only. You got a few of them. I honestly am not wild about the entire thing, except for one song, but Route 66, Election Day, Tossin' and Turnin', and then Jungle Rock. Jungle Rock is an awesome remake of Bundle Up. I think it should have been on Pleased to Meet Me.
Yeah, it's a cover of a Hank Mizell song. It was a kind of rockabilly guy from the 50s. So, they're still doing the sort of odd, weird covers and recasting them for themselves. That was a pretty minor, I guess, release. It didn't get
sort
some
of
kind of wide
stopgap
thing.
EP.
And a lot of that stuff has come out over the years on different comps or box sets, including kind of definitive one. But they like I say, Pleased to Meet Me could have been a double album because there was so much material. So a lot of that ended up on that EP.
Some of these have that signature sort of Pleased to Meet Me production style. So if you like that sound,
but just lesser versions of that. I actually forgot to give it a rating, so I'll give it 2.5.
I give it 3.
Okay. Bob?
The EP, I would say, 3.5, I guess.
3.5?
Yeah.
You want to add a quarter to that?
Yeah, let's add 3 and 3.75 stars. It's like Star Search over here.
All right, 1988. The only penny they toss into the hat that year is Cruella de Vil from How Will and Their Stay Awake compilation. Another example of them getting a shot at the big time and missing.
Was that really a shot at the big time? How big was the Cruella de Vil cover going to go?
Comparatively, I guess. It felt like it at the time, maybe. I give it 3 stars. I always like this song. Not a major ordeal.
They kind of nail it. I don't know. I give it 3.5.
3.5?
You could easily hear like Buster Poindexter coming in and singing it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be that surprising. But I think they do the job.
I'm glad I'm only imagining Buster Poindexter doing that. All right. How about you, Bob?
Oh, yeah, I like that version. I give it 4 stars.
I can't tell if you're reluctantly grappling with giving stars or if you're pondering it so hard that
I'm just kidding. Every time I do one of the 3/4 star things, I just hear Ed McMahon's voice, on Star Search. So it's that maybe that's what's throwing me off.
Okay. All right, now we're moving into a serious Mehr territory. 1989, Don't Tell a Soul. First, I want to ask you, Bob, was it originally intended to be called Dead Man's Pop? What's the derivation of the title?
No. Well, there was some talk of that. Yeah. In fact, it had been announced in a couple of magazines, including Spin, that it was going to be called Dead Man's Pop. And then Don't Tell a Soul was actually crops up as a line on Birthday Gal first.
Right.
But then on Will Inherit the Earth, he actually whispers it in the kind of the bridge or in the outro. And so that's where it came from. And so it has kind of multiple meanings. And I think maybe the photo, by the time they were taking the photos, he's kind of shushing. And so Don't Tell a Soul kind of plays with that. So Dead Man Pop somewhere along the way fell by the wayside.
Okay, so this is the first Replacements album featuring Slim Dunlop, Bob Dunlop, who replaces Stinson. Bob, that is. And, this has got a very, very different vibe. I remember at the time, first of all, I'm a huge fan at the time. All my friends in high school are huge fans at the time. And, watching 120 Minutes, seeing I'll Be You, legitimately one of their best songs, I think. And then the record comes down the pike, and it's nothing like I think it's going to be.
This is one where they sort of lose that scruffy underdog sort of charm. It's kind of hard to pull off the underdog shtick when it's like when the music is this polished. The record was made by Matt Wallace, produced it. He had kind of done. He was doing the Faith No More records around the same time, and he was kind of like a big indie alternative guy in the '90s and early 2000s. And then it was mixed by Chris Lord-Alge, who was kind of like. Has mixed like everything ever. He mixed like his big breakthrough was like he mixed some of those big Springsteen singles like Dancing in the Dark and I think Born in the USA. But he's sort of a modern day like Pro Tools turd polisher kind of mixer. He's a very glossy, very he almost invented the modern style of mixing. The sound of the mix, you can tell they were going for a very like polished, wide stereo, like commercial, like much more so than the mix of Pleased to Meet Me. Was what the final mix of Don't Tell a Soul sounds like. So the recent reissue with Matt Wallace's less polished mixes, as we were saying before, it's one of those examples where I prefer the alternative mix over the.
Well, and I'll tell you the story that basically they had flirted with using outside mixers on Pleased to Meet Me in terms of the single. Jimmy Iovine had done a pretty minor rework of Can't Hardly Wait, which is available as a 7-inch or whatever.
Yeah.
But
I like that. I like that Iovine remake.
Yeah. So basically, they went and made this record. It was a lot of pressure on this album to succeed after once again, Pleased to Meet Me. Everybody had really heightened expectations. It fell short because they started with The Ledge as a single and
which is
various
weird.
things.
That's fucking weird.
Well, it seemed, again, you got to realize radio at the time, alternative radio wasn't a force, and so they still had to kind of focus on album-oriented rock, and that was as a radio format to get it played, and that seemed like the most album-oriented radio song, very much like Blue Oyster Cult sounding kind of thing. Anyway, what happened is just dumb luck in the replacements. It was a song about suicide. There was a bunch of teen suicide. MTV got cold feet. They stopped playing it. Radio stopped playing it. Cut the legs from under the record. And so, it sold more than Tim, but not as much as they were hoping. But there was still, again, with the replacements, there was always enthusiasm from the record company. So they went in to make a new record, tried to get a bunch of different producers, started making the record up in Bearsville, New York with Tony Berg, was a young guy, but, had real chops as a producer and musician. The fit didn't work with him in the replacements. Those sessions blew up. Matt Wallace, who is also young, but kind of a little bit more in tune with the replacements and could roll with the punches, he sort of made a really great record. But because he was so young and he hadn't had the hits with Faith No More yet, the sort of insurance policy from the label and management side was, let's go hand it off to a real pro hit-making mixer, and maybe he can sort of transform the record into the hit record that we want, sell a bunch of copies, and get on the radio. And that was Chris Lord-Alge. To the extent that Lord-Alge did what Lord-Alge does and was tasked with by the label and management, he succeeded. It was their biggest selling record, sold about 300,000 copies. The single got to top 50, top 51 or whatever on the charts. But in the third, and there was a lot of blowback because it was seen as a very non-replacement sounding record. There was a lot of chorus, a lot of effects, a lot of the sound was sort of scrunched in a way that basically Lord-Alge kind of does his thing, and
lots
he
of
did
compression, very heavy
lots
compression.
Of compression. Yeah, and he did that to Replacements record, and so people thought, rightly or wrongly, the Replacements have compromised, they've sold out, they're trying to get on the radio, blah blah blah. They made this record. Well, it's true that they released that record, but in fact, they had made a completely different record, and a record that was a much more logical follow-up sonically.
But hold on, hold on. Let's just pump the brakes for a
Sure.
second. So if we can,
Sure.
we're talking about sonic distinction between one record and another, and there's definitely a sort of a sweeping difference between the two. But
Yeah.
as far as the material itself, the material is sort of irreducible. So we have more mature themes, a heightening level of disillusionment going on.
Yep.
I remember the day it came out. I bought it the day it came out. Was driving around in my used Golf, my Volkswagen Golf, in 1987, driving around my hometown, Livingston, New Jersey, feeling really disappointed that somehow their music had shifted into what felt to me like sort of desultory, middle of the road. It felt empty. The only thing I was thinking was, why had this been the sound they'd selected? And why were these the messages they were trying to get across?
Right. Well, I think the songs, people can like them or not like them, or certainly they were changing. Paul was changing, the band was changing, the way he was writing was changing, and that's a natural thing. After 10 years as a band, there's going to be, and there always was with their placements, sometimes incremental, sometimes bigger leaps from record to record. But I think the question that I was sort of trying to address, and I think that obviously the Matt's kind of new mix does on Dead Man's Pop, is it wasn't just a mix, it wasn't just a sonic thing. There were creative choices that were made by Lord Alge that changed what the record was. If you mute out a banjo at the end of Talent Show so you can't hear it, that's not just a mixing decision, that's a creative choice. And so then it changes your whole sensibility and understanding of what the band's intention was. Yes, the songs are still the songs to a certain extent, but I think that's one of the things that it's not just a different. It's a good lesson in how much mixing can make a difference. Mixing, people think of it as a sonic thing, but it's an editing choice. And if you record 6 guitars, on a track, on an album, on a song, on a track, and you use one of them, it not only is that changing the mix, you're actually changing the intention of the band, and I think that's really.
So let me ask you point blank, okay?
Sure.
There's no question in my mind. I mean, I think you have to be a fool to think that "Don't Tell a Soul" is better than Dead Man's Pop.
Right.
But my question to you is, do you believe that making it Dead Man's Pop makes it a great record or a better record than what it was?
That's a tough thing because it's hard to unhear an album. If you compare them, as I listen to it, it's like, holy shit, this is a really, before where it was a sort of ho-hum disappointment album. It's like, no, this is actually a really good album. And it makes a lot of sense in the after Pleased to Meet Me. It's that you see the through line and it feels right. But you also can't undo history and 30 years of context and knowledge that you have about a record. So and fair to say, the songs are not the exact same kind of songs, but I do think what was done to them really did make a difference in how the songs were perceived and how the intention of the band was perceived. And so I think in as much as you can sort of change history and right or wrong, I think Dead Man's Pop does that. And it's not just a sonic thing. It really is about creativity and intention and meaning and the choices that were made that some third party came in and basically wiped all those out. And so I think it's, the band made that decision consciously, obviously, because they wanted to have some kind of success after 10 years. But I think if you're just talking as a pure creative thing, Dead Man's Pop isn't just a different mix, it's a different record. And I think had that record been released in '89, you and your Jetta would feel a lot different about it,
right, So. This record, to me, it was interesting listening to it this go round, and comparing those two, comparing the two, Dead Man's Pop and Don't Tell a Soul. For starters, this record to me is much more goes with All Shook Down, because it's really a songwriter record, right? There's not so many songs in this record that are like, this song is about the band playing like a kick-ass powerhouse band. Like even on Pleased to Meet Me, song like IOU or something, that's really about the sound of how amazing they play. Mm-hmm. This is a kind of more singer-songwriter where they're kind of playing to support the song. They're kind of a little bit different kind of band, similar, I think, to All Shook Down. It's a different kind of mode that he's in as a songwriter.
That's a good observation. And in fact, that's exactly what happened, because this is the first record that they didn't really, exception of one song, Darlin' One, which they wrote on the sound check of the previous tour. All these songs Paul basically wrote by himself with a drum machine and gave the band finished demos, which then they tried to learn and kind of replicate.
There's no like real bangers where you get the sense that they wrote this in a basement somewhere or something. That was always present throughout all their other work. And
Talent Show is probably one that sort of is mostly like that. I mean, Darlin' One, even in its own way, they, like I say, they kind of did actually, was the only song they did really write on as a band, and it's credited that way.
Right.
But yeah, there was a again, Paul's almost 30 at this point. They're not teenagers, hanging out all day and night with each other. They have lives and wives and different things. And so that did change the way, and also Paul getting a drum machine and a 4-track, that changed it. So I think.
Right.
But he had recorded with drum machines before, and no problem. But now, hold on. But now he's pumping out what I consider back to back to be a puddle of diarrhea. I mean, that sounds like John Waite
he'd never done a whole record that way. And I'm just saying in terms of if you're hearing it, you're right. If you are hearing it as a different kinds of songs and written in a different way, it's because, in a truly in a technical sense, in a logistical sense, it was written differently.
Right.
And this and All Shook Down are, kind of the two of a piece. But in the end, he takes it to the band, and you take the songs to the Replacements. There's still going to be an element of Replacements in it, but again, it's it's not 1979, it's 1989, and so things are going to be different. Yeah. But again, I think it's one of those things. No, you can't ever. We couldn't. There's no way to completely change and erase "Don't Tell a Soul" and the impact it had, and the way people perceive it, or the way people unhear it. I do appreciate you acknowledge that you'd have to be nuts to like it, but I feel like there's some people who are like, well, I like both versions. Some people are like, well, I still like Don't Tell a Soul, and I understand that.
One song of theirs that's a really great song that they just didn't nail on either version is "They're Blind." That's such a well-written song, and I feel like neither version of it really captured at its
He does
best.
Sad Resignation really well.
Yeah, well, the Andy Wallace version is a much slower version, and it's cool, and it's a much more like kind of artfully done kind of version. But it's just a little too slow.
I like the version that's on Dead Man's Pop because I think it restores the original guitar solo. That was one where label politics, the label guy's like, I don't know about this, so they changed the solo, and then Lord Alge did his thing. Probably the best version of They're Blind is the Bearsville version, which is like a demo, just Paul acoustic, and that's really the purest form.
It's such a good song.
Of that.
Well, that middle 8 is so good. Oh, man, it's a really good song.
So I would say Don't Tell a Soul, I'll give that 2 stars. I feel like as far as material goes, the only 3 songs that I care about from the record are Talent Show, I'll Be You, and Darlin' One. I don't really care about the rest of the record. And there's a couple songs I actively don't like, especially the 2-song stretch. Anywhere Is Better Than Here and Asking Me Lies, not into that 1-2 punch.
I would add Aiken to Be and They're Blind to songs I like.
I'll say that your Redux, my friend, I would say bumps it up to 3 stars. So thank you for that. Almost all of these remixes and such that come down the pike, I listen to out of curiosity and discard. Always listen to the original one. You have supplanted Don't Tell a Soul, and that much I appreciate.
That's definitely gratifying. Yeah, I would say for me is maybe like it was a 2.5 star originally, and I'd say we got it up to 3 3/4 stars. Maybe if I'm feeling proud, it's a 4. For me, so it's behind.
If you were in the studio right now, I'd be embracing you wildly.
I don't believe in quarter stars.
I know he doesn't. So it's great to finally meet a brethren.
This is a 2.5, 3.5 for me. So we're all kind of on the same page.
Yeah, totally. So also the rarities. Let's talk about just a few songs, especially We Know the Night, Portland, and Wake Up. Those 3 songs are really great.
Again, like a lot of Replacements records, they left off maybe some of the best stuff. I think Portland's one of their great songs.
Yeah, it's a great song.
They didn't really even attempt that with Matt Wallace. That's from the Bearsville version.
Right.
Wake Up, which was kind of like a sort of a throwaway rocker, but kind of fun. Again, they scrapped a few things because Paul, just as his tendency, he'll get tired of songs and then he won't repeat them, even from session to session for the same record. So,
the next step is, first I want to deviate and say, the mythology as accepted is that the ribeye is the best steak because fat makes things tasty, and fillets are not even to be sampled. The narrative also says that All Shook Down is the sad, unfortunate ending to the Replacements. I've always deemed this to not be the case. I've always loved this record. I want to start with that foot forward. And say that even though it's got its weirdnesses in terms of the drummer being replaced here and there and just some session people, that kind of thing, and playing by the rules of the classic rock rule book as far as that goes, that I think it's a wonderful record filled with great material, and they went out gracefully and with style.
Well, this record to me is similar kind of approach making it. It's a singer-songwriter record, but he's just got a better batch of songs for the most part. This one has its own kind of distinctly kind of slick sound to it. This has a very separated kind of sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it
very
does not
loud,
sound like they're in the same room.
Very loud kind of snare drum thing, very super prominently loud.
It's a peculiar record because they basically, Paul, as you say, he started Well, he wanted to make a solo record. Then the management and label talked him into doing a band album. But then he started demoing it and then really making the record on his own. Him and Scott Litt, had produced REM and stuff. And they started making it basically with an Akai sampler, again, making the record with a drum machine, and then replaced the drum parts with real drums. And then he was bringing in other people.
And there were 4 drummers on the thing.
Yeah. And then Tommy came in, and then so basically it's really, people see it as a Paul solo record, but it's actually a Paul and Tommy record. They made it together with various other people. It's not a band record in the sense. There's really only one song where, Chris, Paul, Tommy, and Slim are playing.
It's Attitude, right?
Attitude, I believe. But Slim's on a fair amount of it, and had a fair amount of influence on it, as he did Don't Tell a Soul.
Let's talk about just credits, because there's a lot of vague crediting here.
Yeah,
I think it's only Tommy on bass, right? Because there's no bassist included on the list of session musicians.
Yeah, I think at one point this woman Sarah, Davis, who I can't remember. She played with Gang of Four and stuff. Like, she was playing bass and it wasn't happening. Tommy came in, so I think he is the only one that ended up on the record. It's just all it's all Tommy. And then the drummers are the main thing. It's Drayton on several tracks.
Charlie Drayton, who played on a bunch of famous records. It's like the drummer on like Love Shack is Charlie Drayton.
Yep, and he's an expensive. He was an expensive Winos. Played with Keith, and he's actually out with Dylan right now. And then Michael Blair, who played with Costello and Lou Reed, he's on several tracks. And then a few things don't have drums. And then Mars is on one, and I believe Mauro Magellan of the Georgia Satellites on another. So yeah, it's basically a revolving drum scene.
Was Mars the fact that Mars brought in cassette demos of his own material? Was that just was Paul ready to go, and that just kind of pushed him over the edge?
No, I think it was just like the idea of like, hey, we're 10 years into this band, we're a certain thing, we're not going to all of a sudden change roles now. Although, there was precedence for that, I guess, with Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Yeah, but no, that was fucking genius. To let everyone take a turn and then said, I told you guys, and then break up the band. That's genius.
So he didn't quite do that, but I just think, Paul was sort of dragged into making a band record, kicking and screaming to a certain extent. He sort of halfway did and halfway didn't, realized he needed Tommy. They did some sessions as a band, but really it's a kind of Ghost replacements record in a way. And it's the come down. He was at the end of his drinking.
I think that's precisely what it is. It is the Ghost replacements record, and that oddly that kind of gives it a meta vibe, because as a final record, you feel the finality of it.
Some people love this record, some people don't. I think Paul's writing really was evolving, and this was like a new step for him. And there's some really, really great songs. I mean, the guy who's writing
so
Sadly
good.
Beautiful is the guy who was writing Gary's Got a Boner 5 years before.
Yeah,
kind of crazy.
Someone take the wheel. Nobody bent out of shape. The last is an absolute classic. It's a standard.
I think it was just coming off of an almost big record, radio sounding record, and Don't Tell a Soul. This was like not what was expected or needed from a commercial perspective.
Right.
And obviously it was kind of a down note for the band to go out on, but as a record, as a collection of songs, as an evidence of him as a songwriter, and even evidence of the Ghost band, it's still pretty amazing with all these additional players. I think it's actually, in a way, probably their most underrated record in a funny way.
I'd have to agree with you. I saw them on this tour. I saw them in February '91 at the Orpheum in Boston, which is I had just met Joe 6 months previous. He and I went to college at Boston University. So I thought they were awesome, even though it was late in the game. So was that Steve Foley behind the kit?
Steve joined for the tour, because basically they... basically the animosity with Chris was reached a breaking point. Paul had said some stuff in an interview in Musician Magazine. Chris wanted him to retract. Wasn't going to happen. It was a kind of ultimatum situation, and that was it. And they were going to get different drummers. Gina Schock from the Go-Go's was proposed, Clem Burke, but in the end they went with the guy who came into the bar. They said, next guy that comes into the bar, he's our drummer, whether he can play or not. Fortunately, it was a guy named Steve Foley, who had been in a million local bands. Was actually a very good drummer. Totally different than Mars. More of
I thought you were going to say it was Don Henley.
But yeah, so he did that final tour. And I don't actually think Steve did any recording even of the B-side stuff. I think that was...
Let's also mention that John Cale's on this fucking album.
Yeah, he's on Sadly Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve Berlin, Ben Montench, Johnette Napolitano. It's an interesting, like I say, of all the records, the last two, Don't Tell a Soul and All Shook Down, kind of have the craziest and deepest sort of stories behind the albums, just because of where the band was, which is funny because everybody thought, that's going to be the least interesting part of the book, and my research, and it actually turned out to be the most interesting. So you can't always tell what's really going on with the band just by the record or what the perception is.
I can see why some people don't like this record. If you're certain fans of the band, if you're a fan of their unhinged, like scruffy underdog kind of charm, this might not be your thing.
Or like if you've been like really noticing that Westerberg is a genius since If Only You Were Lonely, this is your record.
Right, exactly. I could see why. To me, this one's kind of split in the middle. I give this one 3.5. But I will say, song for song, the songwriting is really deep on this record. It's probably maybe the most good songs he had for a record at one time.
Probably the weakest link, which in a way isn't the weakest link because it gives you a sense of where he was. Is he was so kind of alcohol poisoned and at the end of his rope when he was making in this, he's so out of breath. His singing is just, he didn't have wind, as he put it, but in a way that lends itself to the material
because the session guys are playing everything so perfectly. So the fact that he's so ravaged creates a beautiful tension.
Yeah, so it's anomalous, kind of weird catalog. It's a transition to a solo record. It's a Ghost Replacements record. But if you strip away all that stuff and you didn't know who this was or what this was, and you just heard this record on its own merits, I think it would have a much better reputation than it does. But because it's in the context of Replacements world, it sort of gets overlooked or sometimes dismissed.
So this is, I know it's an ask, but I would like to read from my notes just because I felt inspired listening to this. The enigma of this record is that Don't Tell a Soul has the whole band and sounds less like them, and All Shook Down is the piecemeal version of the Replacements and sounds more like them. So why is this a great Westerberg solo effort where while his actual solo stuff, in my opinion, sucks so unrelentingly? This is their hangover record, waking up at the end of the 80s and wondering why they bothered trying as hard as they did if they were just going to pack it in and grow up like every other schmuck who washed up onto the shore of the 90s. I know why this album should not work, but it always did work for me, contrary to popular opinion. It's not the sexy side of the rock and roll dream. It's the morning after. It's the session guys who showed up because the band themselves couldn't possibly be bothered. It's the clock-punching craftsmanship that kicks in, thank God, after the inspiration's dried up for good. I'll give it 4.5 stars. Actually, I'm upgrading to 5 stars.
Wow.
5 stars, yeah.
I don't totally agree that his solo stuff is worthless, but that's for another show. But yes, I really love what you said there, and I do think that's it. I mean, it kind of captures the essence of this album. It's very, very weird, but it was written and recorded under some weird circumstances, and kind of is the come down after a decade long bender, in a weird way. Yeah. And so I think it has in its weakness, in his physical weakness, and the desperation of the songs, there's a real power there, and yeah, you nailed it. So I would say I like it I like it probably at a 4 or even a 4.5. You've got me to bump up my numbers.
Nice, thank you. Well, I will say, just to clarify, I don't think I am not a fan of everything. The first few records out of the gate I really liked by him, and then when we pick back up at 49 minutes, which I re-listened to today, I think it's amazing. Completely revelatory, all that stuff.
And I think he thinks that might be his best record too, in a weird way. So
I think that's his best record. I really do.
Yeah. Well, all Shook Down for me, I think I like it more than most people, but not as much as you guys. I gave it 3.5, but I do quite like it.
I think you're more representative of how much.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a split down the middle for me, because I really do like the songs. Some of them, I think the arrangement is just kind of lacking. I think some of them don't shine as much as they could, maybe.
It's definitely the dark horse, and it's one of those records that is not universally beloved, but it definitely has its fans.
But it definitely has a strong songwriting throughout. So yeah, good record.
So 1991, Don't Sell or Buy. It's Crap EP. that has Oughta Get Love, Satellite, which is a Tommy song, and Kissin' in Action. I'll just slap that with a 2-star just so we can move on.
2 for me too.
I'll give it 3. I really like Satellite. It's the first Tommy song, so
Maybe we'll playlist
that was released anyway. Yeah.
All right, you know what? We're gonna, Bob, with your quarter-star predilection, I am gonna make sure that Satellite gets on the playlist.
Okay.
All right, I'm doing
Sounds
that right
good.
now, making that in the notes there. All right, so Westerberg gets 2 songs on the single soundtrack, and his first solo record, 14 songs, released in '93.
Does SNL again after being banned.
Right.
Yep.
Because he throws on a suit. That's how it works. Put on a suit, come on back. So, 14 songs definitely seemed like there was plenty of promise for a commercial joyride for him. But it didn't really work out that way for him, unfortunately. Eventually, did that fare well commercially, Bob?
No, I think 14 Songs was his biggest solo seller, and then it was sort of diminishing returns after that with those 2 records, and then the Capitol record, Suicane Gratification, which sort of sold probably the worst of his solo ones. So yeah, it was kind of downward numbers from 14 Songs on.
I do have to say that Suicane Gratification is his most it's so awkward as
It's
far
one of his
as
least satisfying puns.
it's the nadir of his pun work. It really is.
The album you remember, is it 59 minutes, 49 minutes? What's that
49.
one? The one that's all one
49.
track.
It's so good.
That one, I feel like if you just conventionally put it out with track listings and stuff, and they'd promote it a little bit, I think people would have liked that.
Well, then it's 2006, and Don't You Know Who I Think I Was comes out. And holy shit, it's Message to the Boys and Pull and Dive. And I like both songs, but I especially, of course, with the tip of the hat and the title, I can't help but like Message to the Boys a little bit more. I give them both 3 stars.
Message of the Boys is the better of the 2, I think, pretty clearly. So it's kind of like, it's like a 3.5 and a 2.5. Those 2 songs for me.
Yeah, I give it 3.
But yeah, cool release. Josh Freese on drums on that.
In 2013, we have Songs for Slim EP. So this was recorded and sold to benefit Slim, who had unfortunately suffered a stroke. So
Right.
Chris Mars had contributed to 1 song, Radio Hook Word.
Chris Mars, he'll put his toe in the pool to do a
Right.
replacements thing, but won't
But
jump
he
in the water.
he did the art.
Right. Yeah,
Did
it's a
the
toe
art.
in the pool.
Yeah, exactly.
Get behind the drum kit, dude. That's what we want.
And I don't love it. I give it 2 stars, but it's nice that they
They're
did it.
having fun. I
Yeah.
didn't rate this. I rated it NA.
I mean, if the real, obviously Chris's song was more of a solo song, but Busted Up, which is the Slim song they did, and then they sort of threw on some covers. I'm not saying Gordon Lightfoot, Lost Highway, the Hank Williams song, Leon Payne, and then Everything's Coming Up Rose. I don't know. I just really like those songs because I know they kind of have specific kind of meaning to Paul. So I really like this record. I mean, it's slight, obviously, in terms of a bigger thing, but I give it maybe 3.5.
Yeah, I felt like an asshole giving it 2. I felt kind of desultory just saying the words. So whatever. I mean,
There's no going back now, man.
You can give my rating whatever rating you want, but here's now we're kind of at the present. I will ask though, what's going on in Westerberg world these days?
He's pretty much retired in painting and has given up guitars and rock and roll and songwriting as far as I can tell. But I say that this week, and he might put out a record next week. Who knows? That's the kind of guy he is. So.
How irascible is he in terms of the legacy of the Replacements? Day by day, does his outlook toward the fans and toward his work change, or does he have one outlook?
I think since the reunion, and then since the book, and since these projects, he sort of divorced himself from it. I think after the reunion was kind of the victory lap in a way, or the kind of.
Is he happy? Is he happy with how everything went, or does he have regrets about?
No, I think the regret. I think that reunion was so successful, and people were so happy, and they played really so well that you couldn't walk away from that. even he couldn't walk away from that
Right.
feeling, unsatisfied. I mean, I think it was what it was, but I think that was the line in the sand for him. It's like, okay, now that's fully part of my past.
So he's at peace with everything. There's nothing turbulent about his.
I'd never speak for him, and I would never say he's at peace, but I don't think it's, they did their part. They said their piece. They did the reunion, gave everybody a kind of chance to see them who didn't get to see them the first go round. And since then, he's sort of handed the legacy part. Not that any of those guys really, were great custodians or tenders to their legacy. He's kind of handed it off to me and to his managers.
He was a literal custodian.
Yeah, right. That's right. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of taken on. It's like, anything you do at a certain point, if you're an artist, if you get big enough or are deeply loved in a certain way, you have to let it go. It's no longer in your control. And I think at this point, he's unless you're Elvis Costello and you want to micromanage your reissues and things like that. I think Paul was never that guy.
Why are they nicknamed the Mats, which is one of the fucking worst band nicknames of all time?
Well, I think it was a drunken thing for placemats, which was and then a bunch of girls who were kind of in the scene started calling him that, and he sometimes calls him that himself.
I never got with that for whatever reason.
Yeah, some people don't, but it's good for me because it was another way of not saying replacements 6,000 times.
Right. Right. But here's Bob, tell me if you connect with this. So, I get a lot of charge out of this is really devouring everything in one sitting. Obviously that's the basis for the show, but then to talk about the overview and the shape of their arc as you can only see by doing this work. So here's my prognosis. Scurrying out of the canon, they showed that they were somewhat willing to play by the rules and utilize certain signifiers to demonstrate devotion to genre. That is until they tore up the playbook and invited their fans on a wild ride that reeked of anything goes musical freedom. Unfortunately, without rules, it's hard to create a sustainable work environment that avoids the pitfalls which swallow up everyone else, and that's when the walls began closing in on them. So my top 3 albums, number 3 is All Shook Down. Number 2 is Sorry Ma. Number 1 is Let It Be. Worst album, I will specify, is the Don't Tell a Soul iteration of that project, not the other.
My top 3, I have Sorry Ma at number 3, Pleased to Meet Me at number 2, and Let It Be at number 1. I would say Tim is bubbling right under that. That'll be the next one there at number 4. But yeah, I love them. This was a lot of fun to do this listen and to kind of, when we do this show, we kind of listen to all these right in a row, and you kind of live in this world for a week, and it was a nice world to go live in for a while. I'm going to miss it. For me, I would say it's tough because, it's always ever changing. I would say still, for me, number 3 is probably Pleased to Meet Me. Number 2 is Let It Be. And I would say, in a weird way, Tim is just so close to my heart. That and I think it has the most important songs, but it comes with an
so cool. That's a cool number 1.
But it comes with an asterisk in that, and I mentioned in passing. Technically, the last original material or original replacements album was the live album, Live at Maxwell's, which comes from that Tim period. And to me, that record, because it was recorded so well,
amazing.
I think that if I had to sort of convey, because I think the records, all of their records in a sense, except for maybe the first one, have imperfections in terms of song choices or certain things that were put on or production, whereas I think that live record in its best moments is really the most pure distillation of what they were and why they were so great.
Yeah.
And so, I know that it's a live album. You could say that's sort of cheating, but I would say, Tim, but with a kind of almost asterisk of the Live at Maxwell's, because it's the Tim era of that. When I think they were kind of at their peak.
How about Worst?
The Don't Tell a Soul, the original Don't Tell a Soul.
Yeah.
But again, with that has its own happy ending because of Dead Man's Pop. So
right, yeah, it certainly does, and it's an even more joyous happy ending than a massage type happy ending.
Speaking of happy endings, I think we're at the end.
Yeah, we really, really want to thank you. I mean,
is there anything you want to mention or promote or talk about to the?
Yeah, well, I don't know when this is airing, but obviously, we've been working on this really really cool sort of series of replacements reissues, starting with Live at Maxwell's. We've done expanded versions of Pleased to Meet Me, Sorry Ma, I Forgot to Take Out the Trash, and obviously the Don't Tell a Soul reimagining with Dead Man's Pop. And this month, in April anyway, Record Store Day, we've got a vinyl breakout of the a live show from the Sorry Ma box, which is the first professionally recorded show of the Replacements in January 1981. And so it's an incredible thing that's coming out on
awesome.
on
Nice.
vinyl that's available for Record Store Day. So that's the new thing.
sweet.
And then if anybody's interested in finding out about the book, Trouble Boys: True Story of the Replacements, available everywhere or at replacementsbook.com.
And it's truly a classic. It's undeniably readable, super incredibly in depth, and very well written. He really takes your hand, and you can visualize the entire thing.
It's very helpful for doing this show. That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome, guys. Well, I appreciate it, and thanks for letting me. I haven't really kind of thought about this stuff on such a deep level in a while, so I appreciate the opportunity to let my decade plus of Replacements thing not go to waste completely.
You know what? The main thing I wanted to communicate to you during this was you're welcome. I'm just kidding.
Thanks so much for being on with us. This was great.
Don't go
this was
quite
super
yet.
easy.
But before we wrap up, we just want to say that definitely follow us on all the social medias, regardless of whether, even if you hate social media, you live in the woods and you're a complete Luddite. Sign up for all of them. Follow us on every single platform.
Just to follow us. Let them track all your data and brainwash you with Russian
That's right.
propaganda.
It's obviously worth it because we have top shelf content, including unbelievably, Bob Mehr is here to talk about the Replacements. So follow us, subscribe, send us a voice memo in the link to the show notes.
Hang out on the
Let
Facebook
us know what
discussion
you
group.
think. Yeah, just become
Give
involved.
us noogies in there.
We have so much good stuff coming down the pike that it's almost embarrassing. I feel embarrassing, sort of like how Icarus must have felt in his more ambitious moments.
Yeah, he had so much podcast content. He burned up.
He was the most ambitious podcaster of all time. That's what led to his demise. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time on
Discography.